few years back around Christmas, my sister and I were driving down a country lane in the UK. It was late at night and very cold when my car began to skid as we came to a corner, and we lost our grip, sending us tumbling down a ditch and into a farmer's field. Initially we were both okay, but the car's bumper had come off and also one of the wheels. We got out the car and rang my boyfriend, who was at work, but got no answer. So we stood in the field for some time, waiting for him to finally look at his phone. Whilst waiting and trying to keep warm, a nice lady pulled over who said she would drive to the village and ask her husband to come back with a tow rope. But an hour passed and there was no sign of her or her husband, and it was freezing cold. Just then, 2 men in a lorry pulled up, both of them from Liverpool and with strong Scouse accents, and said they could pull the car out to help us. The lorry seemed well equipped, but everything in me told me not to let these men near us, even though we were stranded and freezing. So I declined their offer, and they drove off. However, about 10 minutes later, they came back and said they couldn't leave us there and really wanted to help. But I was still on edge with alarm bells ringing, so I declined again. They didn't listen though, got out their lorry and started walking towards us. The next thing I remember is a completely different man in a different vehicle putting a tow rope on my car and putting on the spare tire, making it drivable for the short distance to my boyfriend's workplace. This man was the husband of the previously mentioned woman. I had a bad pain in my shoulder which was later diagnosed as a broken collarbone. I hadn't felt it until after I remember the man coming to help. This man said that his wife told him to come and help, and he had left straight away, which in no way could have taken the time that we had waited. We were very attentive to the time, as we were waiting for my boyfriend's break so he would see his phone. But discussing it later on, my sister has no memory of these 2 Scouse men, and only remembers waiting a long time for the woman's husband to come. How has this happened? And why do I have no memory of what happened after they got out of their car? I'm a 5'8", 150-pound male and have the strength and ferocity of a cold, moist noodle. I was up around 5 a.m, as I'm a morning person, so I thought I'd ship off some packages before going to work. I parked my car facing the parcel machine, left the engine running and went about my business when I noticed 2 guys with dark hoodies. It was 75 degrees outside, and they were about 50 feet from me, conversing with each other. I didn't pay them much attention. I was just aware they were there. Just when I had pulled out my wallet and was about to pay for my parcels, both guys made a beeline for me. They seemed quite nervous and kept looking around, and were now about 10 to 15 feet from me. My fight or flight response was starting to kick in. Well, at least I hoped it would. And all I did was freeze and look dumbfounded. Now I have quite a conspicuous dashcam mounted under the rearview mirror, which is very visible to anyone passing by, and difficult to mistake for anything else. One of the guys most likely caught a glimpse of the camera and turned his head away, trying to cover his face, and the bloke closer to me stopped, visibly confused, and confronted the one concealing his face. I couldn't hear what they whispered, and some of the words may have been "don't" and "away." The leader of the 2 turned to me then, mumbled something and asked if I could tell him the correct time. So I did, then they walked away. Sure, 2 guys in this smartphone era and neither have the time. Not to mention the fact that the business complex had a large exterior LED screen displaying current air temp and time. It all seems absurd from every angle. As why would a common street thug need to fear a dashcam? They could have just yanked it out. Plus the storefront had one camera pointing at the parcel machine. If they weren't muggers, that's an awfully weird way to ask for the time. I'm keeping my dashcam, as a good luck charm if nothing else. So this happened about 4 years ago when my girlfriend and I were both 21 years old. We were out on a drive up Highway 1 past Davenport, California, and we spent the day at the beach, driving up and down some back roads in my Jeep. It started to get late, so we decided to call it a day and head home. And if you're not familiar with California, Highway 1 has some stretches of road that are on cliffs, high up above the ocean, and there are a lot of turnoffs along it where people park up to watch the sunset. We were on a stretch of the highway that's pretty far between any houses or businesses, and I drove past this particularly sweet turnoff that almost always has a car parked in it during sunset time, but for once it was empty. So as it was around sunset, I did a U-turn and backed into the spot. It was a small area with a huge dirt mound on one side, and a steep cliff face with a trail going up about 60 feet on the other. The gap in between the two sides was around 16 foot, and the mound was on the passenger side where the cliff face was on the driver's side. We were pretty close to the edge, but it wasn't an abrupt drop. There was a medium-sized dirt mound, so cars wouldn't be able to just roll off the cliff. But anyway, I was pretty stoked to be there, and we sat in the back of my Jeep facing out over the ocean, watching the sky turn red. It was nice. About 25 minutes in, my girlfriend hopped out to get her water from the front of the car, came back, then right after she sat down, this black BMW SUV pulled up. Now, like I said, there was only room for one car in this tight spot. You could theoretically park 2 cars, but you would have to go directly in front of my car and block me in. And that's exactly what this guy did. I was pretty annoyed when he pulled up, as I think it's pretty rude to pull up on someone in such a small spot, then block them in. My girlfriend said, "What the hell?" "I know, right? What a rude ass," I replied. Then she went on to say, "No, I mean, I saw that car drive past when I was getting my water, and the guy looked at me, so it's weird that he turned around and parked here." It was strange and made me even more annoyed, but it was a nice evening, so I tried to brush it off and enjoy it. They'll probably leave in a couple of minutes anyway, so we went back to watching the sunset. 10 minutes passed, then the driver stepped out of the car. He was this yuppie-looking kind of guy, in his late 40s or early 50s probably, about 6'3", and he was wearing a button-up shirt and tie. He looked around and slowly walked up to the back of my car on the passenger side and said hello to my girlfriend and I. We said hi back, and there was a pause as he looked over the edge and said, "That's a long ways down." Then he looked back at us with a creepy half smile. I was already a little weirded out, so just said to him, "Yeah, it sure is," with a forced laugh at the end. He then asked us, "Do you guys have any cigarettes? Maybe something healthy like American Spirits?" Something healthy? Coincidentally, I did have some American Spirits cigarettes, and they were on my dashboard in the front, so he'd obviously seen them, which made the way he asked seem kind of weird to me. I gave him one and he said, "Ah, yes, thank you." Then he went back to his car and started to rummage through the back. My girlfriend and I were both looking at each other as I said, "Isn't this kind of weird?" "Yeah, why the cliff comment?" she said. The guy then came back after a couple of minutes with a fold-out chair and a small duffel bag that he put on the ground. Then he folded out his chair and sat right next to us about 3 feet away. He didn't have the cigarette I gave him anymore, and I don't think he'd even smoked it. He then randomly began asking us questions like, "Are you guys homeless?" No, we're not homeless," I replied, throwing a short laugh at the end because I was just trying to play it cool. He then asked, "Are you two from around here?" "Yeah, we live in the mountains by Highway 17, I said. "That's pretty far from here, isn't it?" he asked. So I told him. It's like 30 to 45 minutes, so not too far. The sun was starting to get lower in the sky, and it was beginning to get dark, when Mr. American Spirit Guy reached into his duffel bag and pulled out some glasses and a huge handle of vodka. "Here, do you guys want some?" I said that no, we were good, but he insisted. "Come on, let's relax a little. "No, I need to drive." "Suit yourself," he said, and poured himself a fat glass, downing it immediately. My girlfriend and I threw glances at each other that communicated, "This is weird," and we sat there in awkward silence for about 10 minutes. There was some kind of weird tension in the air when out of nowhere he suddenly asked, "So does anyone know you're out here?" Red flags were now very high, and also at this point I was starting to get annoyed, because he was ruining our evening with his creepiness and questions. I was now being short with him and said, "Yeah, most likely," and he just nodded and didn't say anything after that. It was just turning into a weird-ass interaction, and I was getting such a weird feeling in my gut about this whole situation. I eventually asked my girlfriend, "Well, we should wrap this up, don't you think?" And she immediately said yes. So I stood up and my girlfriend crawled in through the back seat into the front passenger seat, and I closed the rear door, when immediately the dude snapped his head towards me in an almost comical, creepy way and said, "How are you going to get out if I'm blocking you in like this?" What the hell is this dude on, I thought, but realized he had a good point. I tried to act chilled and just said, "I think I got it." Got inside my Jeep, locked the doors and turned the engine on. My girlfriend said she could see him now rummaging through his duffel bag again, and my adrenaline kicked in and things started to move fast. Not even paying attention to the dude, I engaged the four-wheel drive, and there was just enough space between his car and the cliff face for me to angle up and tilt my Jeep at a sharp 45-degree angle, which was sketchy because I pinned the gas. But when I looked in my mirror, I saw the guy quickly walking around to my side, and I was barely able to get past his car without hitting it or flipping my Jeep onto it. But once I did, I peeled out of there. My girlfriend and I were like, "Holy shit," and we looked back at the guy as we drove away to see him standing there with a blank expression on his face. We could see that he was holding something long in his right hand close to his side. I don't know what it was. He just stood there looking at us for a second, then he quickly packed up his things. I had to pull over to put my Jeep back into two-wheel drive before going faster down the road, and we saw the guy pull out and drive away in the opposite direction. We never saw him again after that, and I'll never park along Highway 1 near that time of night again. I went on a road trip to a small family reunion because they were beginning to break apart again. This was long ago, and at the time I was living far away from them all, so it was obviously going to be a long ride. After about a day of driving and pulling into gas stations, I needed to sleep, so I pulled into a motel for some rest. It seemed normal at first, and there weren't many people there, only a few workers and a couple. Now, despite all the stuff that has happened in my past, motels weren't all that scary to me, and anything bad that ever happened at them was only in horror movies. I still felt slightly on edge, though. I checked in and went to my room with my bags. I'd only have to stay here for a night, and the room was cozy with nice lighting. So being comfortable and tired, I got off to sleep easily, though at 2 a.m. I woke up with a weird feeling washing over me, and I now felt really uncomfortable. I decided to get up and get a drink to help calm me down, and I found a hot drinks machine in my room, so made myself warm tea as I wasn't a fan of coffee, and after I finished it, I attempted to go back to sleep. About 5 minutes later, I closed my eyes, and the room phone suddenly began ringing. I wasn't going to answer as I was too scared, but I wanted to know why I was being called. So eventually I picked up the phone, but just heard a faint white noise sound. I immediately ran to the reception area, opened the door and quickly realized nobody was there. Not the receptionist or anyone else that worked there. I could hear the white noise sound again faintly in the back room of the reception. It was like how an untuned radio sounds. But keep in mind, this wasn't in the 90s or before. This was very recently. Now I know that this wasn't really all that weird. Maybe I'd gotten a prank call and the receptionist had just gone to sleep or something. It kind of comforted me a little to think that that's what happened. When just then I turned around, and there was a man there. He was tall, above 6 foot for sure, and he said, "What do you need?" I told him that there had been a call to my room, and that's when he told me that it was a regular occurrence, and that it only happened to people that deserved it. Deserve what exactly? I thought. I didn't ask as I didn't want to drag the conversation on any longer than necessary, so I walked back to my room. During the rest of the night, though, the phone kept going off, not stopping at all. So I got up again and went outside, and I noticed the man was standing outside my window with his back turned towards it. "What are you doing?" I asked him, and he told me he just needed some air. I went and got a drink from one of the vending machines, walked back and saw the man was gone, but my room door was wide open. I got back into bed after closing and locking it, and yes, I did just ignore the fact my door was wide open. I was just too tired now and couldn't be bothered with all the fuss. An hour later, I was woken up again to the sound of knocking on my doors. And I say doors because it wasn't just the front door, but the bathroom door as well. Also, I realized that the front door was now, oddly, not locked. I ran at the door hoping that if someone was out there, I'd knock them over and I'd have time to get to the front desk. I got to the front desk and this time the receptionist was there. I told him about everything that had just happened, and he told me I sounded crazy. I told him about the call, when he said that that never happens, and that whoever told me doesn't work here. The receptionist came back to my room with me, and the man wasn't there. In fact, there was no sign of him at all. But I know it was real. I know it happened, but I never saw that man again. This happened years ago in Eastern Europe when I was a dumb teen who loved walking the city alone after dark, a city with a tramway system. On this one particular night, I was sat in a tram station, waiting to catch the last one home. 3 stopped at this station, 2 of which went where I was going, which is important info for later, and the time was around 10 p.m. As I sat there waiting, lost in thought, I barely registered a man quietly walking up and standing by the shelter. I thought nothing of it. He was just someone else waiting for the tram. That is until I started getting a weird feeling. The streets were quiet and dark, and there was no one else in sight, just me and this guy, and I began wondering why he chose to stand as close as he was to me, especially when he had so much space. I couldn't understand anyone wanting to socialize this late at night, given that I was not a very social person myself. So I glanced at him, trying not to overthink it. He was a bald, beady-eyed giant, tall and built like a bear with a big belly and big arms and legs. I was 5'2" and scrawny, but that wasn't what scared me. It was the fact that he was staring right at me, unblinking and expressionless, not even attempting to look away. No, this guy was intentionally making me feel uncomfortable. I instantly felt weak and shaky, with cold shivers going down my spine, which wasn't normal for me at all. I realized quickly that I wasn't in a good situation, and I couldn't miss the last tram as walking home was out of the question, and on top of that, my phone was almost dead. I was a shy kid and didn't have what it took to scare this guy away. I knew that, but I had to at least try. I only managed to utter a small "hi," trying my best to startle him out of whatever he was thinking. But my attempt failed in the face of his silent, threatening aura. He kept staring with no sign of intent to reply. He was enjoying this. Feeling the panic rising inside me, I told myself to stay calm and think rationally. Maybe he didn't hear me. Minutes passed and his stare continued to burn on my skin with no tram in sight. Ignoring him didn't work. So I mustered the courage to speak once again, this time louder. "What do you want? Stop staring." Again I got no answer, and he definitely heard me this time. I felt myself starting to get angry now, and didn't want to let this guy get to me anymore. I didn't want to continue to give him the satisfaction of watching me squirm nervously and pretend that his behaviour didn't bother me. I took a deep breath and forced myself to start really trying to think of what to do. I knew what I couldn't do. Fight him off if he made a move, and there was nothing I could say or do that would get him to stop. I didn't know what his intention was, but I knew it wasn't good. If I tried to walk away, he would probably follow me. And I could run, but he would most likely catch me up before I could tire him out, since his legs were much longer than mine. Even if I'd managed to somehow lose him, walking home through dark alleys past the junkies and gypsies that were always prowling around could land me in an even worse situation. I could pretend to call someone, but he might feel compelled to act much sooner if he felt threatened. So what could I do? The only thing I could do realistically was to try and outsmart him somehow. So I started developing a few plans depending on which trams showed up, trying to confirm whether he was just amusing himself and actually waiting for a tram too, or popped over for other, more suspicious reasons, and whether I could get any kind of help. I couldn't let him see where I lived, so if he followed me I'd have to be prepared to employ whatever strategy available, and for that I needed to stay rational and aware of my surroundings. While I was still thinking, the first tram showed up. It was one I could have taken home, but this one pulled into the depot right in my neighbourhood, forcing me to lead him to my home. I hoped he would board it and leave me be, but he didn't. He kept watching me carefully. I let the tram go, desperately hoping it wasn't the last one to head home. He continued to watch, and I sensed that he was quite happy with how things were going. I put up with it for another 15 minutes, trying to focus on another plan of action. I could now pretend that I needed the other tram, the one going to a different area of the city, and just ride to the next station, getting off as soon as possible so I don't end up too far and miss the tram I need. This tram showed up next, so with my heart in my throat, I boarded it and sat down by the door. He got on it too, but sat himself in the back, pretty far from where I was. I let out a sigh of relief, thinking this might still go well. When the tram reached the next station, I got up and out, not looking back and hoping it was all over. But when I stepped onto the pavement and watched the tram drive away, I couldn't see him in it. I turned my head slowly and was terrified to see him walking towards me, looking slightly pissed off. He stopped just a few steps away and resumed staring, this time with a clear hint of malice, still in silence. My vision blurred as I fought back tears of despair. He was not going to let me go. The helplessness I felt was unbearable, but I couldn't cry. I couldn't give up. I had to find a way. I had to get home tonight. The prospect of what might happen to me any time now if I didn't was becoming too real. My head was full of unanswered questions, regrets, and horrible scenarios. I wanted so badly to not have to think anymore, to not have to fight back the tears and stay composed. But I knew this would be his cue to enact whatever messed up plan he had in mind, and I couldn't let that happen. Then I saw the final tram approach, the only one I could take now, and got on as quickly as my trembling legs would allow me to. When I was in, bright lights enveloping me, my mind snapped out of its nightmarish spiral of fear and allowed me a moment of clarity. I had 3 stops to figure this out. I sat down at the front and looked at the driver. He was a frail old man, blissfully unaware of my distress, and getting the driver's attention was a no-go. We passed 1 stop. There was no one else waiting to climb aboard. I turned around fully expecting to see that the psycho had followed me again, but what I did not expect was him to be sitting right behind me. He was not taking any chances. He was making sure I wouldn't try anything like the last time. I shot him a hateful glare and allowed my anger to overcome my fear. Then I stood up and purposefully walked over to another seat in the middle of the tram car. I wanted to make it clear. I was not going to put up with his BS any longer. He got up too and slowly walked up to a spot 2 seats behind and diagonally from me, then sat down with the tiniest arrogant grin on his face. Already expecting it, I shot up and stood by the middle door instead, determined to keep him on his toes. If I stood right by the door, he wouldn't have any idea which station I'd planned to get off at. He remained where he was this time, convinced that I was bluffing. After all, this was really the last tram. There was nothing else I could possibly do to escape now, so my defiance was just a funny act to him. This was my chance. I had to take the risk. It had to work. There were 3 doors on the tram, and they all opened and closed at the same time, and stayed open for around 5 seconds before closing again if no buttons were pressed or people detected on the threshold. The next stop, the only one left before mine. It came into view, and the tram slowed to a stop. The doors opened. I made no move. 5 long seconds passed. The doors started to close. I bolted out and ran for it, reaching the back door as fast as I could and slamming the button to open it again. My whole body tense with adrenaline, I waited a long, painful second and jumped back in, keeping my head low, holding my breath and crouching behind the nearest seat. I shut my eyes tightly and exhaled slowly while thanking the gods I didn't believe in for that button working, and wishing with all my might for him to not have seen me before I got back in. As I was waiting to hear his footsteps approaching, I pictured him frantically looking for me. Was he still on the tram, face screwed up in anger, head turning like a fat, ugly meerkat? Or was he catching his breath on the pavement of the last station, mad eyes searching the darkness for me? As the tram continued its loud journey, banging and clanging in sync with my heartbeat, I dared smile to myself, imagining his face when he realized he messed up. Hand on my chest, I did my best to stealthily look around the corner and found no one looking back. I stood up in excitement and threw myself at the foggy back window. There he was, standing alone and victimless on that slowly fading out of sight station, watching me leave him and his vile plans behind. Giving someone the middle finger never felt so good. I made it home and told no one my story, for fear I'd be admonished for my naivety. But I was safe, I was proud of myself, and I learned my lesson. Creepy stranger, I hope the events of that day taught you to not underestimate girls, and prevented you from becoming a criminal for the rest of your life. Now that I, a 23-year-old female, am back from Germany, I've had some time to think over the events of my trip. But it's hard to think positively considering what happened to me the last night I spent in Stuttgart, and I'd like a place to talk about it. I spent about 2 weeks travelling around Germany for the Euros, and considering how many fellow Scotland fans were over for the games, I never felt completely alone, despite being a solo traveller in a foreign country. I guess I became too naive in how I trusted the older groups of Scots who'd buy me drinks and chat with me all night about where they're from and who they knew. They were just typical Scottish chats, and I let my guard down. The last night in Stuttgart happened like most other nights in Germany. I'd be myself and would get noticed by a group of older men or women who'd inquire as to who I was with. When they heard I was alone, they'd remark at how brave I was, as a good-looking lassie being here all by myself. I'd then be integrated into the group, drink with them, celebrate with them, and that night cry with them after Scotland lost. Determined to enjoy my last night, I said goodbye to my new friends and adorned on a short white dress draped in my Scotland flag, and went out looking for a good place to drink and dance with strangers I'd never meet again. I met a few people that night, but it was while I was alone that I met him. "That bag's bigger than you are," I heard as a jolly older man wandered over to me. It was true, I had my rucksack with me that night. "Where's your boyfriend to carry it for you?" "Not sure yet, still deciding if he's going to be German or Scottish," I quipped back with a smile. Most of my interactions would start this way, with a friendly smile resulting in an offer to come drink with their group. And after offering to take me to a nearby Irish pub to drink with him and his family, I graciously accepted and we began walking. He was overly exaggerating how incredible he thought I was for doing this alone, bowing to me and excitedly telling passers-by how I was myself and how brave it was. I would smile awkwardly and change the subject. I wish I could say alarm bells were ringing, but they weren't. After all, he was just a wee Scottish grandpa, one of many I'd met that night. He began prodding me on if I had somewhere to sleep tonight, remarking how they had a room in their hotel if need be. "I wouldn't force myself on you or anything," he said. I froze. It was so unexpected. I truly looked at him for the first time since I had met him. He was a relatively short man, taller than me, with a larger build and wrinkles to match the white hair that was poking out from under his Scotland cap. He began quickly explaining how he knows I'd be cautious about that sort of thing being a smart girl, that I could trust him, but again reiterated that he wouldn't force himself on me. I laughed nervously as all the beer I'd drank earlier seemed to drain from my body, and I began taking in my surroundings. "Where did you say your family were again?" I asked. "Just in an Irish pub up this hill, so like I was saying." I didn't really pay attention to him. We were still on the populated main street of Stuttgart, but the numbers were dwindling the further we went. My ears pinged an alert to my brain, signalling I had just missed something important, or horrifying. So I mustered up a smile and politely asked, "What did you say, sorry?" "That I'm a vegetarian, because I killed my 44th man in a vegetable field," he said. "Oh. I've been deployed in loads of countries. The first 6 lives I took were in Ireland." My blood ran cold. I'm a descendant of Irish immigrants who fled to Scotland to escape the brutality of the Troubles in Ireland. "Did this man kill my family?" "Killed 12 in Iraq," he continued. I could only listen to parts of his ramblings as I began desperately planning my escape, locking eyes with every person that walked past. There weren't many. We had almost reached the top of the main street now. "Why are you so tense all of a sudden?" he asked. The words brought me back to the conversation. "You know I can read you like a book. I'm doing all this for you, see? I want to protect you. And Molly, I can guarantee you right now you don't realize how much danger you are in." I felt a gentle tap on my shoulder, spinning round to see a young German man smiling at me. "Scotland," he motioned to my flag. "I love Scotland." "Is there anywhere to eat round here?" I blurted out to him, staring at him, praying I'd turn around and the old man would be gone. Brief confusion crossed the German's face before the old man began rapidly jumbling up the sentence, "Sprechen Sie Deutsch," in an attempt to sound as if he was speaking German. "Essen," I whispered. The young man pointed in the direction we just walked from. "There's a McDonald's down there," he said. I turned back to the old man, whose look I could only describe as motionless, as if he was staring through me, like I was no longer there. I felt another cold shiver before smiling. "I'm going to go grab something to eat, but I'll meet you in the Irish pub later." As if snapping back to his jolly self, the man quipped, "Now don't be like that. I'm off to a rave just now. I'm playing at it. You don't want to miss it." "I'll catch you later," I smiled. The man's face again dropped into a blank stare before he turned and walked off. I think the German man called after me, but I didn't hear him. I kept my head down and walked wherever my feet wanted to take me. I couldn't think, only walk. I don't know how I got to the train station, nor how I got to the hostel. There were no Irish pubs in Stuttgart, or at least not in that direction. So to all solo female travellers, never say you are travelling alone. I've always been a person that has weird things happen to them. It's not a matter of if something is going to happen. It's more when. And because of this, I've become pretty aloof when it comes to interacting with the world, maintaining a "it is what it is" mentality. However, I feel like I was justified in being freaked out about this incident in particular. Not a lot actually scares me. but this is one of the few things that did. The setting was a typical scary story one. 11:30ish at night, pitch dark outside, hardly anyone on the roads. I was freshly 18 and driving on my way back from a 6-hour shift at work and had pulled into a 24-hour fast food drive-thru. I live out of town and I knew I'd be too tired to make myself something once I got home. Plus, I was starving. Nothing out of the ordinary happened while I was getting my food. There was nobody else around, and me and the drive-thru worker seemed to be the only ones currently awake. What I assumed was his car was the only one in the parking lot, and it was parked close to the employee exit and entrance, which is almost right next to the exit of the drive-thru. I got my food, bid the guy a good night, then pulled into the nearest parking spot fresh out of the drive-thru, which is literally right in front of it, though there's enough space between it and the exit for a car to get by. I parked the car and began setting myself up for the drive home, unwrapping my wrap and putting my straw in my drink, the usual. When out of the corner of my eye, I saw the headlights of a vehicle pull into the parking lot from the farthest entrance. I paid it no mind, figuring someone else had had the same idea as me, and went back to setting myself up. For a solid minute, I was getting myself situated before I suddenly got the feeling that I wasn't alone. I looked up in time to see the same vehicle pull up right next to my car, literally the next parking space over. Mind you, the parking lot was completely empty. They could have parked anywhere else, yet they chose to pull up right next to my tiny little car, which felt more like an insect compared to the massive black truck they were in. In this moment, I jumped into defensive mode and immediately started taking note of everything I could see about this truck. It was completely black. The back windows were tinted, but there was enough lighting that I could see the silhouettes of 2, maybe 3 passengers in the back seat. In the front seat was the driver, who was obscured by the darkness, and the passenger, whose door was almost snug up against my door, was tall and lanky, wearing a baseball hat and a face mask, and had a hoodie on with the hood pulled up over his head and hat. For a few moments I just sat there staring, and the passenger of the truck was looking at me. I could feel it, and I was majorly creeped out and uncomfortable, yet frozen in place. The truck had pulled into park. I could hear the gear change, and I saw the driver move accordingly. Me and the passenger just stared at one another through our windows, my brain screaming at me to move, but I couldn't. My hands were still in the process of unwrapping my food. I wasn't a pretty sight. My hair was slicked back with sweat into a ponytail. My shift had absolutely wiped the floor with me, and anyone could tell just by looking at me. And I was wearing my glasses that I use when I drive. The longer we sat there, the louder my brain kept screaming at me to move, to do something other than sit there and stare at this guy. I've been in enough situations where I know that my fear response, unfortunately, is to freeze, and that was exactly what I had done. That was until the passenger moved. Within a few seconds, a lot happened. The passenger moved and opened his door and began the process of getting out. My body finally kicked into gear right as I heard my brain audibly tell me, "Nope, go," and I listened. I yanked the car into drive and sped out of there, one hand still holding my wrap, the other gripping the steering wheel and swerving to get the hell out of there. As I exited the parking lot, I looked back through the window and saw the passenger getting back into the truck. I didn't look long enough to see if they'd left or not, considering there was a traffic light coming up. But I'm assuming they did. I probably broke multiple speeding laws getting the hell out of there, but I didn't care. I immediately messaged my friend and told her what happened. I knew she'd be asleep. And then called my boyfriend at the time, who'd been waiting up for me so we could talk once I got off work. He picked up and I told him what had just happened. He could tell I was serious because of the tone of my voice, and he asked if I was okay. I stayed on the phone with him the entire way back to my house and kept looking over my shoulder, suspicious of any headlights that might be following me. Thankfully, once I got off the highway and onto the back roads towards my house, nobody was following me. I bid my boyfriend goodnight once I turned off the car, got inside and ate my food, and immediately went to bed, too tired to stress over the situation any more than I already had. When I told my mom about it in the morning, she just said, "Yeah, he was trying to talk to you." Which, well, duh. She wasn't very sympathetic to my stress for whatever reason, so I just brushed it off and continued with my day, and then my life. However, my friend that I had messaged the previous night freaked out enough for me and my mother, and she called me the second she woke up and saw my message to make sure I was okay. Even now, months later, she still mentions it whenever the topic comes up, and honestly, I'm grateful she cares as much as she does. My mum's reaction made me feel like I was overreacting, even though logically I knew I wasn't. Freeze is still my automatic fear response, and I'm doing everything I can to fix it. I'd rather not be put in that position again. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the stories in this episode. Please let me know what your views are, and hit that like and subscribe button. Until next time, keep being creepy.